This is the network service of the NTA.
I just don't understand this coronavirus thing. Is it real?
See, coronavirus, known as COVID-19, it's a global problem and has killed thousands of people in China, Italy, Spain, UK, US, and other countries around the world.
Okay. Now, why are they saying that we should stay home?
Because if you go outside and get in contact with someone who is infected, you become infected and then come back home, affect your family. That's how it happens in other countries.
Now, please, help me explain what this social distance is all about.
See, as we are now, the virus travels through the air and by touch. We must maintain 6 foot distance at all times.
Oh, so it's not by washing my hands with soap and water or hand sanitizer that is only important?
Washing of our hands regularly is very important. But we must come together and fight this virus like we did Ebola. It is our responsibility to each other.
Social distancing and proper hygiene. When this is over, and very soon it will be, we shall dance again at the Calabar Carnival, the Eyo Festival, Celebration, Ojudeoba Festival, and Aragongo Festival. When this is over, and very soon it will, we shall flock the beaches again. We shall attend our music concerts again. We shall invite the world once again at the Lagos City Marathon. When this is over, and very soon it will be, we can return to our hustle and bustle. We will gather at our churches and mosques. We shall return to our schools and institutions. Our hope is alive. We are Nigeria. And together, we shall rise again. Nigeria Film Corporation. Powering possibilities.
The main way coronavirus spread is when infected people sneeze and cough. Small droplets of fluid expelled by cough or sneezes are laced with viruses looking for new respiratory tracts to infect. When a sick person sneezes around someone who is healthy, the virus can land in the nose, mouth, or even the eyes, causing an infection. Symptoms can include fever, cough, shortness of breath. Symptoms may appear within 2 to 14 days. Seek medical advice if you develop symptoms and have been in close contact with a person known to have COVID-19, or if you live or have recently been in an area with ongoing spread of COVID-19. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
Staying at home is the most responsible thing to do. Please, learn a new skill. Be a better version of yourself. That's what I spend my time doing. Prevention, they say, is better than cure. I beg, make we sit down for house. I know some of us want to get back to socializing, but if we don't sit down for house, no good feel happen. Please, stay safe and stay responsible.
As a strong immune system increases the chances of victims surviving COVID-19, a corruption-free society creates opportunities for citizens to thrive and prosper. Build your immunity. Stop corruption now. Report all acts of corruption to ICPC on this toll-free number 0800 22 55 4272. This message is brought to you by ICPC and NTA.
welcome to One on One. I am Cyril Stober. The world is united against a common enemy, COVID-19, and as nations continue to search for a cure, I have the privilege on this program to speak with the President of the 74th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Nigeria's Professor Tijjani Muhammad Bande. He joins me via Zoom. Professor Bande, thanks for joining us on One on One.
Thank you very much, Cyril.
These are trying times for the world community. And so we might just start off by asking, how is the business of the United Nations progressing in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you very much, Cyril. I'm glad to be here. And let me start by condoling compatriots of the ones, acknowledging the work our governments are doing to address the situation. This situation, as you have indicated, is a global one. As the United Nations have not closed shop. Indeed, we are every day crafting ways to guarantee that the work of the United Nations continues. We do not have in-person meetings, even though I obviously must have coordinating work in relation to this. The United Nations General Assembly has, through a resolution, agreed to new regulations as to how to conduct our business. And COVID-19 is the most urgent of that business. And this is the introduction. I can tell you, we are matter, but at the United Nations.
All right. At the start of your tenure as President of the 74th session of the General Assembly, you did say that your priorities, that's in addition to the normal priorities of all presidents of the General Assembly, which are poverty, eradication, security. You did say that your priorities would be on quality education and inclusion. This pandemic threatens all that now, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed. This pandemic, and it is something that affects everyone, rich and poor, and all the priorities of the 74th session are affected. Indeed, the idea of education in the context of a pandemic brings us into full realization that while in some parts of the world education can continue in some form via use of technologies, in many parts of the world, Africa included, education has virtually stopped. There are no facilities to allow this to happen, and the inequality among nations, as well as inequality within nations, is continuing with the pandemic. And one of the elements I've always insisted was important was not only poverty eradication and education, but also the whole question of partnership. Partnership is the glue that connects the United Nations as a system. And it is only through partnership that we're able to address the current and emerging problems of the pandemic. And I will say quickly, what is emerging immediately after the pandemic is even larger, and that is the issue of reconstruction of social economic systems, because they are now seriously damaged. Unemployment has increased, and a lot of companies have already folded up. And it's not just in countries, it is all over the world. So this is why partnerships are key. Partnerships not only between governments or between nations, but also within countries and beyond, in terms of civil society, in terms of private sector, in terms of non-profit organizations. This is a new reality that will be waking up to after the pandemic. But But for now, our urgent issue is to address the pandemic. This is key, while we think through the consequences of what we are already seeing.
All right, even as you talk about the consequences of this pandemic, we're still seeing that beyond health, the economies of countries of the world are taking a hit right now. And it's been estimated that for some countries, especially developing countries, they would be requiring as much as $10 billion to recover from what's going on. How do you intend to drive this within the United Nations?
I think the United Nations has created and is creating a platform. It is a platform to begin with of conversation among nations to cooperate to do good for the world. And we have known even before the pandemic that we are not on target to achieve our goals for the 2030 agenda, i.e. the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, because of funding gaps. Commitments have been made, but have not been really delivered in relation to funding, especially of countries, small island developing states, developing countries, landlocked countries, in terms of official development assistance to implement the goals agreed to in 2015. Now, as we were reviewing the funding gaps, and the funding gap is really huge. Then we are hit with this pandemic. Now, it is still possible within the resources available, if we were to utilize the current resources more rationally and more cooperatively, we can still end hunger. We can still guarantee education. We can also reduce violent conflict. And we do need to have more coordination of efforts. And clearly, not only education or health. Remember, at the beginning of my presidency, we had agreed the universal health coverage, an extremely important concept. Now is the time to look at what that universal health coverage entails in terms of rejuvenation of health systems. Of course, health systems are subsystems of a larger socio-economic system. And again, these are connected. We repair the economy and guarantee funding for infrastructure in relation to health and in relation to education. I come back to education because it is really key. So this is the way we are doing it. And as I speak to you, almost every discussion I or the Secretary General or other heads of the various principal organs of the United Nations, whether Security Council or others, they talk about inclusion, without which nothing happens. They talk about solidarity. And the United Nations has launched, through the Secretary Generals, an initiative to support people and countries during this period. And that fund is extremely useful. It's not just an issue of the money, but also the exchange of ideas in relation to the pandemic, but also beyond it now in relation to how we can come back to some normalcy, even if it will be a different normalcy. Thank you.
Well, even at the UN Financing for Development Forum, which held just on Thursday, a concern was raised about developing countries, who many of them considered as countries at risk at this time. And there was a need to raise urgently support for their health systems. Are you, within this context, going to be looking at some kind of preferential arrangement for countries that already have weak health systems in the first place?
Actually, you have seen the tremendous effort and discussions around the question of how the IMF and the World Bank are able to support countries in this period, whether it is rescheduling of debt or some kind of a moratorium or some kind of support to address the urgent concerns and also the medium-term needs for recovery post-COVID. In addition to this conversation is a conversation involving the United Nations. As the United Nations, of course, World Health Organization is key to that discussion. IMF is part of it. World Bank is part of it. And look at also the statement from the chair of the G20. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has given also very significant support both in its own right as a kingdom, but also in the leadership it's giving, trying to give support of donors in the issue of dealing with the pandemic and post-pandemic, some kind of recovery. Countries like Norway, many countries, the United Kingdom, many countries are coming on board. And this is what is important, a collective approach to dealing with what is eminently a global problem.
Would you specifically push for debt forgiveness for countries that may, because let's look at it, if you talk about rescheduling, it's not really clear, is it, how long the effects of this pandemic will be? So would you push for that? Some of the countries, for instance, like Nigeria, for instance, depend almost entirely on oil sales. That is even in the negative at this point in time, where countries have to pay buyers to take off their oil. Would you push for that?
As an assembly, anything that will help restore production and stability is important to us. Without that stability, the fundamental purpose for the organization, which is maintenance of world peace, will be in jeopardy. And remember that the whole purpose of the Security Council is this issue. So the General Assembly is always supportive of anything that will bring stability and will bring solidarity. Now, there have been very important discussion, and I followed the conversation as to what is best, whether support or simply not only moratorium, but shifting payment or renegotiating some of the terms. Obviously, there will be clear pushbacks relating to whether forgiveness will be key. I, as a person, would think that this is a way to go, but I do not underrate the difficulties in negotiations relating to debt forgiveness, as has been the case. But I believe during this particular moment, I think debt forgiveness will go a long way to stabilizing countries. Look at, you have mentioned oil-producing countries and the effect it has on their economies. The same situation is happening when you go to countries or island states that are dependent almost entirely on tourism, which is really receipts of which is next to zero, or even remittances from the compatriots living outside. This is a different space. I don't think anyone alive today has seen something of this magnitude. Literally, the world in lockdown. And now, we are also in a moment in which we are able better to address lockdowns like this than previous generations. The use of technology has enabled us, if we utilize it better, to not only help countries in a long-term basis in terms of enabling them to have technology that will work in agriculture, in health, in transportation, in financial transactions. These things help, and the investment to be made in supporting this, I have seen, like a lot of people have seen, how you can use technology for agriculture, technology for all kinds of things. I think this is why the investment in supporting countries that are now in need yields great dividends for all of us. And I think, yes, back to the question, debt forgiveness will be something that I personally would think helpful. But if negotiations for this become difficult like they have been before, i.e. we are not taking into account the current moment, because this current moment is completely unprecedented, then of course any way to give respite to countries to begin to get back on their feet and ready to do better, I think is supportive. The Assembly, through its various resolutions so far, has shown, one, the necessity to work together to address both current and emerging challenges, including having access to vaccines, regardless of the circumstance of countries. This is key.
Well, all right. Well, Professor Bande, we'll return to the issue of vaccines much later. But for now, let's look at another angle. Before the pandemic started, the world was dealing with the challenge of migration. And even as we speak right now, there are people who are caught between countries, as almost all the countries of the world have, shut their borders. What should happen to those human beings who are caught in between, not belonging anywhere, so to speak?
I think this is something that countries are addressing literally, bilaterally. I mean, the issues are clear concerning when flights are cancelled, you can't easily fly out individuals, regardless of their status, in terms of the COVID-19. This will abate in the following weeks, I am sure. But where arrangements are being made, I think they should be made quickly to lessen the emerging conflict relating to individual citizens who are human beings who have a right to move, but now the situation is completely different. The migration issue you raised has already been addressed in the Compact for Migration in the Marrakesh meeting in Marrakesh. So I think we have, at the United Nations, a very robust set of rules and regulations, and their resolution concerning migration, be it of people coming from countries or during their transition or in point of destination. I think that one is already there. What we want is in the next 4 years to review how well it has worked. This particular situation is specific to the pandemic, and I think the more we have guidance from the World Health Organization and countries engaged, I think the more we're able to solve that one. But the more larger question of migration has already been addressed in the Compact for Migration. I think which I think really is comprehensive enough to look at the rights of migrants and their contributions to economies, both where they are located and where they have left.
Well, speaking of the World Health Organization, it's in the lead of seeking a solution to this pandemic. But even now that countries say there's a need for unanimity of purpose in addressing the pandemic, there are dissenting voices around about what role the WHO actually played and the funding of the WHO. How so do you think this can affect global efforts to address this pandemic?
I think there is strong unanimity concerning the importance and centrality, indeed, of the World Health Organization. The reality of the matter is that by whatever name it is called, such a body is needed. And I think our focus as the United Nations, as the General Assembly, is to really galvanize support to address the pandemic. I think a review post-mortem of the current situation will come after the pandemic. I think for now what's important is to recognize the role the organization is giving us information and guidance in terms of standards. And these are actually what all countries use. Regardless of what is said in the media, the World Health Organization is still the lead agency to provide that guidance, and it is doing so. I think for now, any review concerning its work is premature. We do need such an organization, and it is absolutely necessary that we speak with one voice on this matter. Countries are also giving support. You raise an issue of importance, which is perennial, the funding issue. I think the funding arrangement where we are dealing with more voluntary contributions to look after the work of such an important body, I think is something worth considering. It is a key element in our world that we have a body like the World Health Organization to guide us through pandemics and to think ahead of particular issues and to scan the horizon as it is for other pandemics and to have protocols that will better serve our needs when we have a problem.
Well, you talked about, earlier on you talked about access to vaccines, for instance. And so let's bring up this issue. Even as the world races on to find a solution to COVID-19, access to so many things has been very difficult. It's the same things that all countries are in search of, ventilators, face masks, things like that. And if eventually a vaccine comes on stream, are you worried that there are disadvantaged countries that, even as you say, you'd push for equal access, are you worried that some countries might be at a disadvantage? Because right now, countries are actually struggling to have access to reagents, to so many things.
Yes, indeed. I think the issue of access is critical to our world. And our approach is, one, countries are doing their efforts to do research and development as to get us a vaccine that works. Perhaps several will come on board not too long from now. But by whatever means we're able to have a vaccine, we have to guarantee accessibility and affordability. And this is what the issue in the Assembly is. If we do have a vaccine or vaccines that work, let us guarantee, as we have committed at the United Nations to leave no one behind, that it is available to all who need it, regardless of their circumstance. This is doable. Companies can assist, governments can assist, and I think this is where we are at, discussing how we can better guarantee access and affordability to vaccines when they are developed. For now, countries are not at the same page, not only in terms of their health systems, but in terms of how many are affected. So I think some will pick at different times, and perhaps the rush to get certain products may not be at the same time, and that may help us. And I think with more knowledge, I think we're able to address the specific concern of access and affordability, but discussions are very ongoing concerning how this is to be guaranteed. And this is our commitment at the United Nations.
Today, the cessation of movement, physical distancing measures, and the prohibition of mass gatherings remain the most efficient and effective way of reducing the transmission of the virus. By sustaining these measures, combined with extensive testing and contact tracing, we can take control and limit the spread of the disease.
There is a lot of fake news and report circulating, especially on social media, on the coronavirus. Do not believe or partake in the spread of these fake reports. If it is not on the official website or news from the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, NCDC, disregard such report. Only together can we beat this virus. Only together can we overcome this pandemic. Follow the instructions and guidelines provided to combat this virus. Most importantly, stay at home. Self-isolate, regardless of your status. The virus doesn't move unless we move. Let us work together to better Nigeria. Together, we can do this. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
Let's return to the issue of food security and how COVID-19 threatens the world, and people are already looking at tough times in terms of hunger, eradicating hunger. Well, it's been said that there's no one-size-fits-all in efforts to stop the spread of COVID-19, and we have seen countries adopting so many measures. How important is it for countries to adopt measures that are best suited to their local environments instead of adopting measures used in countries where the pandemic has hit, given the figures we're seeing, much more than others?
I think two things are correct. They appear to pull in different directions, but this is in the nature of reality. I think local solutions are key, but there has to be coordination. You cannot, for example, have in West Africa a notion of free movement of goods and services and people, and one country is doing completely differently than others. So whatever local solutions we have, they must also look at global or solutions beyond the local. This is why it's a pandemic. And I think the issue of why World Health Organization, for example, is key is the issue of what do we know relating to how best to prevent infection, the issue of distancing, the issue of hand sanitization, and what other elements. These ones are basic and they must be common. But when it comes to, for example, dealing with the pandemic or with effects of the pandemic relating to the possibility of access to food, in some places it is simply transportation systems. How do you transport what is already there? In others, it is much more complex than that. I think this is why the issue of local solutions is key. What is the most urgent one, and how do you, in your environment, address it? But even at this, coordination of effort and harmonization is important, because with the interconnectedness of people and countries, I think this is the issue.
Two other things come to mind as you speak of them. Two of the strategies, social distancing and restriction of movements. Yes, I agree the hand washing is universal, but I want us to look specifically at the question of restriction of movements as it applies to those who are involved in agriculture, farmers, for instance. And I'm saying this with Africa in mind, as well as social distancing, given the kind of clusters we see in communities and slums that are in many African cities.
Yes, I think this is why it is absolutely important to be creative. What exactly do we seek to achieve? Farmers must go to work. Let us ensure that they do so safely. If health workers are going to hospital, as they must, let them do so in safety. Otherwise, we continue to go in circle. And that's why the issue of local solutions in terms of what will work in particular settings. Now, where social distancing is a challenge, what solutions are there to reduce risks even in that context? That's why the whole question of using masks and other measures must be thought about, created indeed by local communities. This is what is key in terms of how local communities are able to help themselves while they also help the world, because any one case, any one country that has a problem is a problem for all of us. This is the severity of the situation as of today.
It's been said that no matter what happens now, the world will never be the same again after COVID-19. How much of this has been taken into consideration in developing interactions, global interactions?
Well, I think at the United Nations, the General Assembly has been working. We have looked at our rules. We agreed to fine-tune some to guarantee that we continue to work. We continue also as Assembly to have very, very useful interactions and coordination with the Secretary General, with the President of ECOSOC, as well as with the President of the Security Council. We're able to do this largely through virtual meetings. Occasionally, when that is unlikely to work, then we meet in person, but in small groups. And the work setting, the work culture has also changed. I think the influence of technology to deliver on certain things is becoming even clearer. And that is why my worry expressed earlier as to the necessity to help countries in relation to technology, because otherwise the inequality among nations can only deepen. And that's why technology has shown its promise in teaching, in agriculture, and in having meetings to advance knowledge and ideas, as we are doing now. Some countries are being left behind, and this is not in tandem with our commitment to leave no one behind. This is the issue. And more to the point, it is particularly the reason why multilateralism is key to solving our problems. This is why the United Nations exists. This is why it should continue to also seek ways to better connect to local communities at the United Nations.
It will be 75 years this year. And I'm thinking, all what you have laid out for the 75th session, can it still go on this way? Or what's going to change?
I think the 75th anniversary of the United Nations is a few months away. And in the United Nations, from the beginning of the year, we have been focused on how best to commemorate or celebrate as we will the 75th anniversary of our organization. Individuals, countries, communities, and companies, and even regions have been coming up with ideas. I have appointed facilitators who are busy working the halls of the Assembly and around the world to have ideas as to political declaration to be adopted in commemoration of that extremely important event. Their work is ongoing. They have a draft, and that is just to tell you it is such an important moment in history that we have taken it at the center of our work. What we should do is really guide us to reflect deeper as to the purposes of our organization and its continuing even heightened relevance, especially in contexts such as we are living today. And I think I am excited at the possibilities of that conversation in relation to the 25th anniversary. It's not one event. It's a series of events around the world to remind us about our interconnections as humanity. Thank you, Cyril.
So those events will go on, but with slight modifications, obviously, given the situation on ground in most parts of the world?
You see, the celebrations, we are not expecting that beyond, say, September, I'm just giving a number now, the world will not have in-person meetings.
Yeah, but just in case that happens, just in case it happens, they say you just prepare for, you hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
The United Nations will not close shop. This one is what I wanted to tell you. we cannot close shop, especially in the context of a crisis. And we'll have to find creative ways to guarantee the conversation like we are dealing with you on important issues. And we can arrange this also through regional bodies. There are so many ideas as to how we remind ourselves of how to generate ideas and how to help those in need. Peacekeeping operations are continuing. We had to have meetings to approve budget for peacekeeping during the crisis for the mission in Mali and other things. We have to have means to meet to access funds that are already with us to support operations on the ground in different parts of the world. This is what, and it is the same with the commemoration of the 75th anniversary. There will be creative ways to address the issue when it is due to guarantee that, yes, 75th anniversary is celebrated.
Let's go quickly back to the disease now. How do you respond to fears that at the end of this might well lead to stigmatization, and not just about individuals, but also of countries and nations? How do you respond to fears of stigmatization?
Stigmatization goes against the ethos of the United Nations. And Cyril, I'm sure you've read and listened to statements from the General Assembly, from the Secretary General, from the Security Council, from ECOSOC, as to how this is something that we are combating. There is no place for racism, xenophobia, or hate. These are the very ethos around which the UN is based, that inclusion is key, rights are critical. And I think the best way to address it is to continue to focus on solving problems collectively, and the fringe elements that seek to use this or other afflictions to hurt people, I think should be left in the fringes while we move on. It is a world that we have left and we cannot come back to. We have to respect the rights and dignity of all human beings. This is absolutely important.
Let me just take you briefly on one other aspect of this pandemic, and that's because in some parts it's been seen as an economic war, it's been seen as something to cull the population, and in most parts of Africa initially it was seen as something that was targeting Africa and Africans. Could you speak to that? Because people would look up today and say, yes, the United Nations, how could the United Nations be there? And there are stories of one part of the world, particularly Africa, being targeted.
I think we should discountenance any theory of conspiracy. We have in COVID, a pandemic is a health pandemic, and all countries should address it with the seriousness required as countries, but also as part of the global effort. This is really the main direction. I think to begin to point fingers at all kinds of theories, I think, is to really create problems for ourselves. It is said, as you know, that the idea of the one who is pursuing a rat when his house is burning, I think this is the way I would put it. We have a big issue before us. And I think World Health Organization has given us guidance. Scientists of repute have told us how the pandemic has arisen. If others want to have theories around this that counter this, it is their right, but I think we should focus on dealing with the problem, which is in our house. It's not at the door. In each country on the continent of Africa, leaders have taken it seriously. I think populations should help them, help us all of us, not as Africa, but as the world as well.
Professor Bande, let's now talk about you as we prepare to wind down, to talk about you as President of the 74th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. And I go back to the commencement of your tenure. You had your work cut out for you with the numerous challenges of the UN, but no one could have envisaged that a pandemic would be an added challenge to you. So how tasking has this been for you, this assignment? How tasking has it been, and how have you coped?
Personally, I can tell you it has not been a boring time, that's for sure. We have continued to focus on the issue of equity, poverty eradication, education, zero hunger, and inclusion. And even through the virtual lockdown, we're having virtual meetings with countries, with regions, with UN and other entities to focus on these issues. The United Nations addresses all things of importance to the world, and any little effort helps. Other agencies, other organs of the United Nations are also doing the same. I have a coordination and discussion meeting each month with the Secretary General. I also meet the President of the Security Council. I have very, very close contact with the President of the Economic and Social Council. These ones are extremely key that we pull in the same direction. And I think it is the same thing we have to project as one body dealing with a task entrusted to us. I think the difficulties I face are difficulties all others face. But I do coordination role because of the position of the Assembly as the rule-making body within the UN system. But this has been an enormous learning opportunity, and the promise of technology has become clearer to me, and I think to the Assembly. And I think going forward, countries will also see this, and that's why we should push to reduce poverty, to eliminate poverty, and guarantee rights, and make sure that we have technologies to help us have a world that is more equal. I think this is key.
Well, this might just sound hypothetical at this point in time, but would you rather have had a situation where there was a better factor to galvanize a United Nations than a pandemic?
I think nobody would wish a pandemic, but a pandemic is thrust upon all of us. And I think ours is to take the challenge as we must. And I think when we have changed our rules to allow this to allow work to continue, we have also given leadership to all of us to see that we can operate through more cooperation. And I think the General Assembly has worked during this period, I suspect more than any other period, to guarantee we have resolutions by consensus. We continue to urge delegations to reduce their differences, to see that we can come to common agreement. I think we have done tremendously well under the circumstance. And I think this is the situation we have found ourselves. I've had just last week a meeting relating to addressing hunger. Hunger is an issue. Zero hunger is an issue that I had made a priority. So even during this lockdown, we had a very important conversation involving ILO, FAO, the United Nations, some of the agencies. And I think this has to be done. And we are continuing to work. The Secretariat is also continuing to work. On the ground, resident coordinators are also working with countries to deal not only with the pandemic, but also to think through what should be done post the pandemic, because countries are badly hit. But they are badly hit doesn't mean they cannot even do better after, but they have to think through how this should happen. I think this is where we are at.
Professor Bande, as they say, it will be shiny again someday, and you're hopeful and optimistic that we'll go through this. What are your closing thoughts as we wind down?
And I think my closing thoughts are to remind all of us we have a responsibility to be positive, to help not only solve this current problem, but to treat human beings with the respect they deserve, including solidarity when they need it in crisis such as this. The United Nations is best suited to lead in this kind of time, this kind of effort, but not just in terms of crisis, but even in terms of peace. This is key, and it has partners in human beings. This is the thing. And I'm extremely grateful to the support of the United Nations system, and in particular, support of my main body, the General Assembly. All the representatives have shown extreme support to my work, and we are able to create new things that will endure beyond the 74th anniversary, the 74th session. Thank you.
Well, we must wish you well at this point, and say to you once again, thank you very much for joining us on this program. We do appreciate it, and we'd like to wish you well. Thank you, Professor Tijjani Muhammad Bande, President of the 74th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. It's been interesting talking to you.
Thank you very much.
All right, and that's our program today. We thank you for watching. Next week, we'll be back with One-on-One. I'm Cyril Stober, and I say stay safe.